Morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Great to have you here. This is the Soybean 360 Agro Processing event, day three of it. This session, we're going to focus on processor challenges and technical opportunities in Sub-Saharan Africa. So we have a great lineup of speakers. So the way this works is we'll have some presentations. At the end of each presentation, we will ask questions. So during the presentation, there's a nice chat feature. Type in your questions. They'll get transcribed over, and then we'll ask the speakers at the end of each session. Then we'll roll through each of the speakers, the presentations, and then have a panel discussion at the end. So then also feel free to chat in questions for the panel discussion as well. With that, we'll get started. Welcome everyone. I guess introduce the first speaker. I should do that. The first topic today, we have tag team. Two gentlemen, Brent Wibberley and Jonathan Thomas. Brent is the Director of Food Processing and Nutrition. Jonathan is the Chief of Party with USAID's Alliance for Inclusive and Nutritious Food Processing. They're with TechnoServe. Their title of their presentation is Food Processing Challenges and Responses to COVID-19. Let me give you a little background on Brent and Jonathan. Brent is the Global Director of TechnoServe's food processing platform that supports and developing programs that build the capacity of food processing companies as critical intermediaries in the food system. Brent has over 25 years experience working in African agriculture and food processing industries. Jonathan is the Chief of Party with TechnoServe on the USAID-funded Alliance for Inclusive and Nutritious Food Processing based in Nairobi, Kenya. And he was previously Chief of Party on the Solutions for African Food Enterprises program. Both these programs aim to improve the competitiveness of small and medium enterprise food processors across 5 countries to produce safe, nutritious, and affordable foods. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brent, and then I think John comes in after, and we're looking forward to your thoughts.
Thank you for the great introduction, Peter. You've done a good bit of the work for me in introducing myself and TechnoServe. So I'll get right down to the outline. And also just thank you to the symposium and Soy 360. This is a great honor, and I'm very happy to join this symposium. So today's presentation from myself and Jonathan, just a quick overview here. I'll go briefly through TechnoServe and our link to food processing. But as I said, Peter, you did a great job there introducing that already. So maybe we can move quickly through that. And then I'll get to really what was for us the sudden arrival of COVID and for others in the industry, and how that was quite disruptive and really left us floundering and really needing data rapidly to help inform our response, both the industry response and our response in support of the industry. I'll then go through some of the survey findings, and I will take a lot more time to go through it in more detail. So today I'll just try and highlight a few key aspects of our findings, and then I'll hand over to Jonathan Thomas, who will talk to some more specific case studies and examples of those responses and adaptations in the industry. And hopefully we'll have time to field some questions after that. So yeah, TechnoServe, just for those who don't know us, we help grow strong markets that create opportunities and income for poor people. And we do this by helping enterprising women and men in the developing world to help build stronger farms, businesses, and industries. Businesses like food processors and industries like the food processing industry. So we work fairly often with world leaders and food companies. We work with donor agencies and government bodies. And we really, for TechnoServe, we recognize food processors at the center of the value chain being really critical in the sort of multiplying their effect they have up and down the value chain. So they are, the marketplace, in a very important marketplace for smallholder farm products, for example, and they produce quality and safe and nutritious foods that can go out there for consumption and ideally improve the access to those foods. Just some examples of our reach. We worked in the last sort of 10 years in about 10 countries across Africa. We've delivered customized technical assistance, a sort of one-on-one assistance with over 370 companies and trainings to a wider number of hundreds of more other companies, including government agencies and sort of supportive business development companies. So that's a bit of a background on TechnoServe. Now I'll get to the sort of COVID challenge. For all those who are in the industry, it came as a fairly quick shock to all of us in the early 2020s with government lockdowns and a lot of other things that were suddenly, fairly quickly imposed, and there was a lot of confusion in the industry. And what we saw and what sort of transpired was this sort of massive pressure test of the industry with sort of leaks and cracks showing themselves and vulnerabilities. And for us, as a supportive agency to try and help the industry and for the industry itself to adapt, there was a real need for data. Everyone was sort of kept confined, on a back foot. And so we needed data to be able to react and respond appropriately. So for TechnoServe, what we thought, a way to quickly do this was to go to our existing database of companies that we'd been supporting over the years. So we conducted a few surveys. One survey in early April, at the initial onset of the first wave of lockdowns and things like that came through, market closures. And then we did a second follow-up survey in July to see how they were adapting, and some of our own work was taking hold. And then in September, again, we did a slightly lighter touch survey, recognizing that, survey fatigue could be setting in. But we did a lighter touch survey in September just to monitor progress and see how it was progressing. What we found in our surveys is we were able to categorize the findings into 4 major business dimensions. One being the marketing, sales, and distribution side. The other one being the business's finance. And then on the supply, the supply of raw materials and inputs. And then the workforce that runs the operations itself. So as I mentioned earlier, there's quite a lot of findings in this. I can't go into too much details, but I'm going to now run through each of these categories and some of the findings we did get. And I'll try and highlight 1 or 2 key aspects of that. And I'll start with the most challenging, which was the marketing, sales, and distribution side. So here, on average, about 75% of all firms surveyed reported challenges in marketing, sales, and distribution. And we found this was consistent for both surveys. So in April and July, it was steady, a little bit worse in July by about 2%. But this clearly was where the most disruption was happening, and it had a big trickle-down effect. But as you can see, it was also not, it was more severe for some value chains than others. 9 out of 10 dairies, for example, were really challenged by this. If we look at some of the adaptations now to this aspect, we can see that many firms were looking for new markets. So a lot of market closures, a lot of market disruption. So it's quite natural that about 1 and 2 of these companies, or half of them, were looking for new markets. There was also a scale back in operations, and a growing, around 28%, a growing interest in digital marketing. Moving over to the supply area, this was probably the second greatest challenge, again, affected by lockdowns and transport disruptions, especially across borders. So we know there were delays, increased transport costs and things like that. And so that was also consistent across companies, and more than half of all value chains were really struggling with supply to a certain degree. And this included raw materials, but also the inputs, packaging, fortificants, conditioners, and things like that. Looking at their adaptation, with distance, being a limitation, there was a growing shift to more local supply, but this often came at a cost. So we know that the local market quite often was more expensive compared to what they were traditionally able to get. And also, like digital sales options, there's also a growing interest here we see in digital sourcing solutions. Looking at the workforce itself, with every passing month, the awareness was growing. So we recognize that. But the challenge to managing a workforce was still seen as difficult for at least 1 and 2 businesses. Processes had to deal with fear of contamination, with lockdown restrictions on movement, social distancing challenges, general. We also found fairly interesting remarks. There was a general anxiety as job security was put into question. So, there's some real tangible things like the physical distancing, but then there's also the psychological element that was creeping in, where there was this real anxiety, compounded by the sort of, as the health situation became more of an economic one. So some of the adaptations, we can see on the left side here, there really was quite good information sharing and adoption of PPE. There was good adoption of implementation, at least, of training protocols around COVID. So the hygiene side of it was well messaged, well understood, and companies were doing a lot. You can see also, more than 3/4 of the companies, 77%, had to make changes in their workforce operations. So what they looked like, for example, many companies introduced new work shift routines, increasing the number of work shifts and reducing the number of people per shift, trying to reduce the sort of density of staff on the work in the workplace. There's still room for improvement, I think. If you look at the 61% of daily health screening, that means 39% were not doing that. So I think there's definitely some room for improvement there. On the financial side, this has also been a challenge, especially with the decrease in sales that you could see from the earlier statistics. That's having a knock-on effect on working capital. So in July, we saw about 40% of firms reporting challenges in accessing finance. And we see in their sort of reaction to this, a third or more were seeking finance, different types of finance. And this was a continuously increasing statistic. So in April, this was 14% as an example. So it was rapidly growing space. And we also, from some of the comments, recognize, look at this earlier comment, for example, that it was received, that it was fairly negative response from the lending industry. They feared the risk of repayment, naturally. So there's definitely a lot of room there for improved financial mechanisms. Excuse me. One thing we were able to do, which we found very interesting, knowing the companies we worked with and their ownership structure, was to look at to sort of the different gender disaggregation of these businesses and how those fared. And we were quite startled at the sort of significance here in recognizing a noticeable increase in challenges faced by female-owned businesses. This was for all but the finance component. And this raised, really an important finding for us. And in my view, it calls for more investigation, more targeted gender programming response and research. And trying to understand, for example, what these disparities are. Is this a result of sort of historic inequalities like education and family wealth, or are they more specific to COVID? We know, for example, that women are often the primary caregivers in a family, and the pandemic has increased the responsibility on caregivers. So I think that's was a useful side finding of this surveys. Adding in the September findings, the check-in, and looking at it as a sort of trend here, there's some cautious optimism, I think. If we look at September results, and these results, by the way, are all based on the previous month. So how was your sales over the previous month? The decrease in sales, there was a decline in sales, right, to 39% from 68% in July. So that's great to see. And there was an increase in sales from the previous month, from 10% to 36%. But we have to recognize, right, that was from a really low baseline. So a lot of damage was previously done. So you're improving from a low baseline. Certainly doesn't reflect, an increase in sales on a normal year. But perhaps it reflects the bottom of the curve, right? So maybe they've turned a corner, and that gives us optimism. And that optimism was reflected in the last question here about how they saw the future of their sales. And with every survey, that looked more and more promising. So just looking at all that data and what it meant for us as TechnoServe, it really helped us adapt our response. The data, it illuminated many challenges, and it shows us really that the situation is evolving. The different companies are at different stages in their evolution and require a different response. So, as the outbreak came out, most companies were in the sort of survival reaction mode, dealing with the shock. Some of them are still there now as they enter a new phase of sort of a struggle. But a lot of them have adapted and are in a recovery phase. Some of them are even optimizing. So for us, in support of these businesses, we really had to look at meeting them where they are. Maybe they need still further help with the risk management and new protocols. But with other companies, we're really helping them to optimize against the opportunities that they've seen, perhaps on import substitution and things like that. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Jonathan to talk a little bit about more of our specific responses and case studies. And I'm going to keep sliding through the screen here to keep the timing down. So over to you, Jonathan.
Yeah, thanks, Brent. So I'll talk a little bit about responses specifically under the AINFP program, the Alliance for Inclusive and Nutritious Food Processing, which is working with about 60 processors across 5 countries: Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, Zambia, and Malawi. So, and I'll show these in terms of the 4 areas that Brent has talked about. So initially, the primary concern for processors in the initial stages of COVID back in March, April, May, was really protecting their workforce, making sure that they were able to work, they were, as far as possible, prevented from catching the virus, and that they were able to remain operational and within government guidelines. So, governments across the region, World Health Organization, were sharing health guidelines, but they were fairly generic. So we tailored those more towards the food processing sector, shared those with our processors, and specifically looked at how, on a very practical basis, do you practice physical distancing in the factory setting? How can you maintain production? And actually what's happened is many processors moved to multiple shifts. So they would reduce the workforce on any given shift, but increase to 2 or in some cases 3 8-hour shifts. And then we're able to at least maintain a good level of production. PPE and sanitizer in the early days was in very short supply. For instance, in Kenya, there was nobody, pre-COVID, there was nobody producing PPE in the whole country. It was all being imported, so what was available was quickly snapped up. So we were able to help them source PPE. We helped some processors start production of sanitizer. So we have a processor in Zambia, for instance, which is producing for its own use and also selling to other processors. And introducing health protocols, so screening when staff came to work, making sure that all staff entering the factory and visitors were recorded, temperatures taken, and a basic tracking system in place. On finance, we've seen that many processors face a real cash crisis. Sales, in many cases, plummeted in the short term and are still only slowly recovering. This meant that they were struggling to repay loans. So we facilitated discussions with banks to restructure those loans, delay payments, give them a payment holiday, give them a reduction in interest in the short term in some cases. We help them with cash flow forecasting. So of course the cash flow had suddenly been dramatically altered, so helping them readjust their forecasts. And then put them in link them up with specific funds. So the governments in some countries had funds for businesses, essential businesses like food processors, to keep going. And also with other agencies, we established a pilot grant facility for resiliency of the food processing sector and have dispersed funds of $50,000 each to 10 different processors across the region, just to help them focus on payment of staff, purchase of raw materials, payment of suppliers, etc. Again, just to keep that business alive through that survival phase. On marketing, sales and distribution, we saw that some markets collapsed completely, particularly hospitality industry. So we saw anybody relying on hotels, and that hospitality industry, restaurants really suffered badly, dairy sector particularly. So we helped them look at their sales and adjust to different markets, looked at linking them up to digital online marketing channels. Some processors went back to some very traditional door-to-door sales. In some cases, we helped them look at diversification of products. So an example would be a dairy in Kenya that had been focused on fresh milk sales, which really collapsed. We helped them adjust to production of long-life UHT milk, for which there was an increased demand. We saw generally an increase in demand for shelf-stable products. And then expansion to new markets. So specifically, we linked them up to another TechnoServe program working in Kenya and Tanzania, where we were working with micro retailers, and we were able to develop new markets without really aiming at the base of the pyramid market. And then on supplies, these were also affected because of lockdowns and travel restrictions. So we helped with maintaining those supply contracts, business-to-business meetings to establish new linkages, and pointing them to alternative local sources of supplies. In many cases, supplies of raw material, but also packaging and imported materials were disrupted, so we were able to find the local supplies, even though those were a little bit more expensive and perhaps of lower quality. And I'll give you two examples, specifically soy processors that we work with. The first one in Kenya, so ProSoya is producing fortified soy products which go into relief food, and they have an instant porridge. They also have some animal feed based on soy. But their primary customers are for human fortified foods going into school feeding programs and World Food Programme. So what was at risk here, if this business collapsed, was about production of about 1,200 tons a year, which equates to about 45 million nutritious meals. A company with an annual revenue of $2 million, employing 67 staff, and sourcing from about 4,000 farmers. So all of that was potentially at risk. And you can see that the immediate impact of COVID was that their sales went down by 70%. Schools were closed, so school feeding programs were no longer able to operate. And that was a major part of their market. They saw an increase in input prices, delays, and increases in transportation and cost of inputs. And this really put a significant strain on their working capital, as a result of which they weren't in a position to buy soy from local smallholder farmers and had to reduce their supply base in the short term by 80%. So areas in which we've worked with them, they were one of the recipients of the resiliency grant that I mentioned. They've received $50,000. That's enabled them to re-engage with their smallholder farmer base, which is 19 metric tons of soy from local smallholder farmers. They've expanded their workforce capacity around a new product. So we had previously helped them with a production of a new product, Ujilala, which you can see in the picture there. It's a sort of a porridge, fortified porridge product. We helped them accelerate the launch of that product and onto the retail market, helped them with the packaging and design of the branding and so on. Trained their workforce in the production, packaging and distribution of this product, so it's gone onto the market a little bit earlier than they had originally planned, but this has helped them focus on a new product and cover some of the other market failure. We've also helped them invest in improved hygiene and safety measures and facilitated a $1.8 million investment for new plant layout, which hopefully will go live in the second quarter of next year. So we've really kept that business alive. Another soy processor in Zambia, Essential Commodities, also fortifying soya, particularly into textured soy protein, corn blend and soy oil. Their major product to date has been this textured soy protein, which is quite a popular meat substitute with lower income consumers in Zambia. That's sold through distributors, retail. They have a smaller part of their business is feed processing as well. Again, at risk, a fairly significant business, 2,500 tons of soy production per year, 2.9 million annual revenue, 160 staff, and amongst their suppliers were specifically 500 smallholder women farmers. They saw that their sales went down significantly, increased prices and delays, particularly imported supplies from South Africa and abroad. Severe working capital constraints really made worse by significant devaluation of the Zambian kwacha, 30% over the last 9 months or so. So really in a pretty bad position, struggling business. As I said, with others, we provided them with information on workforce protection, which they put in place, hand washing facilities, sanitization, logging in of visitors and staff. helped them adjust their workplace practices. So they went to multiple shifts, increased hygiene measures and use of PPE in the factory, and then significantly shifted the production of soy oil. So majority of soy oil in Zambia is actually imported from South Africa. And they have historically struggled a little bit to compete with that in terms of quality. With the border closed for a number of weeks, they were able to take advantage of that and up their soy oil production, introduce some new packaging for the retail market. And we've supported them with an application for a $500,000 loan to significantly upscale that going forward. So we're seeing that we've helped them in their resiliency through the initial shock of the pandemic, and hopefully they're better positioned now as we move forward. So we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for listening. I'm happy to take any Q&A.
Yeah, yeah, great presentation, Brent and Jonathan. Oh, we got some feedback from Susan. You want to mute them? Let's see. Sorry about that. Yeah, they're now muted. Great. Great presentation, Brent and Jonathan. Really nice survey, and then the case study, really important. I'm going to just throw you one question. We only have a minute or two. If you could just talk, and you mentioned a little bit about border situation, border shutdowns, and now border openings, and how that affected the food processors, either in your surveys or the Kenyan and Zambian firm.
Yeah, so particularly in Zambia, there's a lot of importation of inputs from South Africa. So ingredients that are added, fortificants, machinery supplies, etc. So we saw that the border was closed for quite some while because of the severe lockdown in South Africa. So those parts weren't available, those inputs weren't available, or were significantly delayed, which put up the price. So we really had to switch to local sourcing. And we're quite hopeful that maybe that will continue, that they will be able to continue sourcing locally. Another area was, which you might not think of, was a lot of the machinery used in Zambia is sourced from China. And we were working with a couple of processors there with Chinese engineers to help them install that machinery. And they were unable to travel during that period. So that significantly delayed a couple of our processes in getting up and running and expanding their production.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that point. We did see in the surveys some of the remarks were around the fact that a lot of the industry is supported by these consultants, these international consultants, and with the stop, whether it's someone from Mvula in Switzerland or a South African milling engineer or somebody regionally, and that really stopped. So they had to become self-sufficient and look at a local solution.
Yeah, I just thought it was an important point you guys raised, and a nice case study, almost a live experiment about when we have import or export embargoes and policy that really you can see played out through the COVID experience, how that policy really adversely affects, for example, inbound raw material, technical assistance, things like that, but also protects markets for infant firms. So very interesting perspective you guys provide. Thanks. We have some more questions. We'll hopefully at the panel we'll get to them, but great job and really, really appreciate it. let's move on to our next presentation. Welcome back, everyone. We just had a great presentation from the TechnoServe team. I'm Pete Goldsmith from the Soybean Innovation Lab. We had a little technical difficulty with our second slotted speakers from Malawi. We're working on that. We're going to jump to Marjatta and talk about volunteering in the food processing space. So the topic for Marjatta, wait, let me bring it up, is taking innovations to ground level through volunteering. This is a very interesting way to move technical assistance to the processing sector. And Marjatta is the program director for the Southern African farmer-to-farmer program, part of an organization called Cultivating New Frontiers in Agriculture, more commonly known as CNFA. And Marjatta is based in Lusaka. She's worked in agricultural development and research for 25 years, of which 12 years were based in West Africa. So we're really excited to hear about these opportunities and hear your thoughts. I'll turn it over to you, Marjatta.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that introduction. And my presentation is a little bit different. As Peter mentioned, I will be focusing on a volunteer program, that can support the agro-processing sector in Sub-Saharan Africa. So I would like to introduce the program to the agro-processors as a way to solve some of these issues, especially during this very challenging time that we have just been hearing about. But also, as I would like to introduce the program to potential volunteers, to those who do have relevant experience, so that they would know the program, they would know how it is that they can volunteer and how it is that they can support the agro-processing sector in Africa, in general, but especially, of course, now during this very challenging time. So as Peter mentioned, I work for the Farmer to Farmer program, and it is a USAID funded program that has actually been around for about 35 years. We will be celebrating the 35th anniversary this year. And since its foundation, it has been focused entirely on sending expert volunteers to developing countries. And these volunteers typically spend about 2 to 4 weeks in a country, and they are there really for the purposes of capacity building. In terms of training, it can be coaching, can be either coaching one-to-one, or it can be coaching to a group. And the volunteers work with very diverse organizations. Quite many of them work in agribusinesses, supporting typically small and medium agribusinesses, but as I will be talking about later, also we are going to start to work with the larger agribusinesses and agro-processors. Many of our volunteers also work with farmer organization and on the production side, and thereby, the supply for the agro-processors, constant supply of quality produce, which is often a problem, is also very much part of our agenda. Our volunteers also support universities, education of youth, and for example, through curriculum development. And also we work with ministries. We might be, for example, training extension staff in new technologies or practices, or then training the farmers that these ministries work with. Our efforts really span the entire value chain. So we work on the input sector, we work in production, processing, marketing, and therefore, our volunteers that we recruit, do possess these kinds of skills that are across these value chains. And currently, I mentioned to you that the program itself is 35 years old already, and typically different implementers are implementing the program in different parts of the world, usually for 5-year periods. And currently, we are in the 2018-2023 phase, where we have implementers working all over the world on the Farmer to Farmer program. And basically, implementing very similar kinds of projects. And CNFA, which is an international development organization based in Washington, D.C., is currently implementing the Southern Africa program. And we work in 5 countries in Southern Africa. We have Zambia, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Mozambique, and Madagascar. And in addition, we also work in Eastern Europe in one country, in Moldova. And over this 5-year period, we will be implementing about 360 assignments in these countries. So it is really a sizable number of assignments. As mentioned, they are generally 2 to 4 weeks, averaging about 3 weeks. So if we think about it in terms of kind of expertise being brought to bear on the issues in Sub-Saharan Africa, it is actually a considerable amount of effort and time that our volunteers are spending with this organization. So why should farmer to farmer focus on processing? And I do have to say that it is still a relatively small portion of the assignment, no more than about 10% of the assignments that focus on processing currently. And our focus is of course on development, and processing is of course an extremely important area that can lead really to this economic growth and jobs. And also, when we look at it from the small farmer perspective, can provide really these much larger and more stable markets for crops. We have, in many countries, it is the small farmers that are really providing the produce and the supply for this processing sector. For example, I think in terms of oilseeds in Malawi, about 70% is coming from the smallholder sector, from very small farmers, on average farming about an acre each. And typically their produce goes then, or there's soybeans, typically soybeans and peanuts, then are collected by aggregators who then sell them to the processing sector. And if we can create this and we can help support a processing sector that is more efficient, more competitive with imports, we can really increase those markets for the smallholder farmers and provide also markets that are really stable and hopefully also profitable. Then, of course, we also, such as, for example, the Soybean Innovation Lab, we very much focus also on nutrition issues. And this is another way for us to really improve nutrition, whether it is through fortification or then also, importantly, food safety. These larger processing companies are much more likely to be able to really of course, generally be able to have better food safety practices. But when we look at a lot of the processing that is taking place, food safety is really an important issue that we have been focusing on. So in general, up to now, when I look at a lot of the efforts that, for example, we at CNFA have been doing, is we have been focusing more on the kind of the small scale processing sector. And I just wanted to kind of give a very kind of brief characterization of that sector. We have a lot of producer organizations, often cooperatives or then small enterprises that are working in that sector. And often our entry point is after these organizations have received or have purchased a new equipment. That equipment might have been donated or they might have paid for it partly, but it is often part of a development project. And these organizations are relatively new to processing, but are really seeing it as great potential in terms of both, earning the income from it, and then also for these farmer organizations to be able to use their own produce for the processing. Often these equipment are very simple. We see a lot of equipment that is coming from China, as was mentioned, I think earlier also. For the small scale, the raw materials are typically locally procured. They are usually kind of homegrown, and we often have issues related to seasonality of the supply. A lot of these small scale processors are supplying only local markets. They are not able to supply to the national markets or even the markets in the region. So they often are really selling in those local markets only. We have also done some work with the medium to large scale sector that really are, working in a totally kind of different environment than these small scale operators. As mentioned, they usually receive their raw materials through either traders and these aggregators. Most of them are supplying at the national level, but some of them are even exporting their products. Obviously, in terms of the equipment, in terms of their level of funding, they are in a very different position than the small-scale operators. So what is it that the farmer-to-farmer volunteers then do when they work with these processing companies? At the small-scale level, equipment maintenance issues and repair issues have been very important. As I mentioned, often these small and medium enterprises and cooperatives might have either received some equipment for free or at a lower price. They have received some training in the use of that equipment, but really often not sufficiently to be able to continue to troubleshoot and maintain that equipment and repair when there are issues. So many of our volunteers have been focusing on really training these enterprises and cooperatives in the equipment. A lot of issues also we have a lot of volunteers have also focused on food safety issues and product quality issues, and trying to kind of bring those products to a level where they could receive certification and thereby increase markets more to the formal markets. Especially with soybean, shelf life of milk has been a topic where there have been quite a few assignments in. And also then, as mentioned, we cover really the entire value chain, but also we cover not just the production side or the processing side, but a lot of these smaller scale actors are really struggling with business management issues. And, there's been quite a lot of training in that and also in record keeping, marketing basics of really how it is to operate that business. At the kind of larger level, our volunteers have focused on standard operating procedures, quite a lot of product development and market development, and also at that level, business management issues. I just wanted to highlight a couple of these kind of smaller scale actors that we have worked with. For example, in Kasungu in Malawi, we have worked with the Mdunga Kasia Cooperative. And there was exactly the kind of situation that I mentioned about. There was a soy milk processing equipment that was received from a project. It was a Malawi government project. And they were really struggling with the quality of that milk. And they also were struggling with the shelf life. And our volunteer really gave training in terms of how it is that one can have that quality product, how to have the consistency, but also introduced another product, soy yogurt, for this cooperative. I think many of our volunteers, when they go and work with these smaller scale actors, especially realize that they cannot just focus on one topic. So, for example, in the case of Dr. Hitz, who did this assignment, he also focused on issues related to pricing and costing. So those just focusing on the kind of processing side often does not work, and the type of these organizations require different kinds of expertise. Another cooperative in southern Malawi that was processing a fortified corn soy blend for baby food and flour. And there really the focus was very much on business management. And we had 2 volunteers go in who helped make who helped the cooperative to develop a strategic business plan, and really gave kind of this very concrete advice on how it is that they can go forward, how it is that they can improve their practices in a way that they can move forward from quite a difficult situation. So how is it, well, what happens then in terms of these processing companies? So if there is a company that is interested in having a volunteer, what is it really about? So most of the assignments are about 2 to 3 weeks in the country. And really the volunteer assignment development starts when there is an interested party, when the processing company is interested in having a volunteer, has a particular issue that they need help with, and identify that issue and contact our team. And at that point, our team will come, we'll have the discussions with you and initiate the development of a scope of work, which then is reviewed by the processing company, and we start the recruitment effort. So once we have CVs of volunteers that we think could help the company with this issue, we share those CVs, and the company, of course, is very much part of selection of the volunteer. And then eventually, of course, 2 to 3 weeks in country, the host organization really will have to be the host and give the time needed for the volunteer to be able to work and get the information that they need. And I just wanted to ask now if, for the agro processors that are listening to this, if you are interested in becoming a farmer-to-farmer host and have a volunteer, please write in your chat box and please identify yourself, and also let us know what kind of support you might be interested in having. And we will later then collect this information and we will contact you about that. For the volunteers or potential volunteers that might be listening to this, I already mentioned about the length of the assignment, but importantly, all of the costs related to the assignment will be covered by the USAID funding. As mentioned, we will develop that scope of work, and that scope of work is often one that gets modified once the volunteer starts the work. There are usually issues that come up that also might need some assistance, that the company might need some assistance with, or then there were some other issues that are really affecting that focus of that work. So the scope of work, while very important, often gets also modified. We also try to organize, for the volunteer, additional opportunities to meet people, to meet organizations. So we try to organize, for example, chances to give lectures and visit different organizations based on their interests. And I think very important is that, many of our volunteers learn that however much they are teaching, but they learn really as much during these volunteer assignments. And many of them want to come back. We have volunteers who have done up to 100 assignments and have been doing it for decades already. And in a similar way, I wanted to ask the potential volunteers to identify yourself and also let us know, what types of assignments you might be interested in. So please identify yourself in the chat box, and then please let us know, what areas of expertise you have that is related to agro processing. Then, as I mentioned, we have been doing less work in the large, medium and large agro processors. But we are now very excited about our collaboration with AOCS and the Soybean Innovation Lab. And there, the focus will be on large-scale processing, and we really are hoping to have this large-scale impact, both at the processing level, but then also at the level of the producing farmers in terms of increasing markets for soybean and for peanuts. We will start this collaboration from Malawi, and with Soybean Innovation Lab, we will be working to identify new hosts for our volunteers and assignments, and also on the scope of work development. We are generalists, and that expertise is there in Soybean Innovation Lab. With AOCS, then we really are looking for their expert there as potential volunteers, and we have already started recruitment efforts with AOCS. And I think this is something new. We have now a tripartite partnership, and we are really, I think, looking forward to the impacts from this collaboration. So how to go forward now? And, I have mentioned that our assignments typically are a few weeks, but since March of this year, due to COVID, we have not had any US volunteers travel to our target countries. Instead, what we have done is we have done remote assignments. So US volunteers have virtually supported agribusinesses, processing companies, and those assignments often have lasted a month or even 2 months, because there is no such kind of need to really have that shorter duration. But just recently, we have also started what we call paired assignments, where we have a US volunteer work virtually, and then we have a local volunteer who works in person. And this is something new. We are just starting them. We have several now ongoing, and is another possibility for the US volunteers. And then finally, we hope, of course, that during 2021, our in-person assignments will start again. And what we hope to do also is that some of these remote assignments we can then convert them into in-person assignments. So those volunteers who have provided support virtually would then be able to go and work with the company in country. So the next steps really would be for both the volunteers and for the processors to contact us and express your interest. We will look for those opportunities for the volunteers, and for the processors. Then we would work with you to see how it is that we can address the issues that you have, and then look for the volunteers to address those issues, whether those volunteers would be working remotely or then in these kind of paired arrangements, or then in the future in person. And that is all then. Thank you very much for this chance to present the Farmer to Farmer program.
job, Marjatta. This is really an innovation, what you're doing in Malawi and working with the medium and large enterprises. So that's very exciting. I'd like you to, as a question, just to revisit the kinds of people, folks, give a little more texture to that, because it is a new idea. We have this new audience of AOCS members who are really talented, who may have ambition to work in Sub-Saharan Africa or maybe other locations where CNFA operates. But maybe give a little bit first pass of the kinds of people, the kinds of positions that you would be a good fit for the industrial sector, say of Malawi, or industrial sector of some other country.
Yes, the type of volunteer that we look for really starts from the needs of that particular processing company. And those needs might, as you know very well, those needs can be very diverse. They can be more on the actual process side. They might be more on the equipment side. They might be more on the marketing side and or business management. Even, communication issues, branding issues, those types of issues are ones that we have worked with quite a lot, and we've had great volunteers who have been working on those issues. So really where it starts from is that kind of the problem identification with that particular company, or then, also identification of an opportunity for that company. So if it is, for example, market expansion or exports to another country, or if it is about marketing and, development of a brand, development of a better brand, in that context, that's where we then start with and look for those volunteers who have those skills. So our volunteers really kind of span that entire gamut of the needs and opportunities that might be there in the processing sector.
So in addition, I think from AOCS as kind of the partner in this and someone who's got great capacity, obviously food engineers, process engineers, industrial engineers, but also packaging engineers, logistics experts, industrial accountants, just all aspects of the industrial enterprise is what you're saying, right, Marjatta?
Exactly, yes, yeah.
Excellent.
And, we have had assignments that focus entirely on managing warehouses, for example. And, so we really, it is really from that need of that particular company where then we will identify what kind of volunteer do we need. I am assuming, I mentioned that for the smaller sector, often our volunteers end up doing a lot of things, So they might, even though they might be just focusing on the kind of the, let's say, standard operating procedures, but then it becomes clear that they really need also help with certain marketing issues. And many of our volunteers have, decades of experience. They've been doing many different kinds of things. So they are able to quite easily also provide that type of support. I am expecting that as we start our work in Malawi with the larger processors, those assignments will likely be a bit more focused, and there will be probably a little bit less kind of need for somebody to try to do everything or try to do many different types of things during those assignments.
Yeah, super. The one other question, then we have some good chat questions as well, and we do have time, so I'm really loving hearing more and learning more about what CNFA does. But what would, you have a lot of experience with first time, people who have maybe never been overseas. What's your, how would you counsel them if they're like, I've never been overseas, I'm an engineer, I'd love to get involved. What about for that person who hasn't traveled or been overseas before?
Yes, yeah, and we are actually always looking for first-time volunteers. We are looking for individuals who might not have had the opportunity to go before, because otherwise also the program will not keep on going forward, right? So we really need people who haven't done volunteering before, and have not having been in Africa before or even having traveled before. Really is not a problem at all, in the sense that we are seeing some great, first-time volunteers who just go in and make real contributions in the field. So, but I do want to say that we have a lot of kind of procedures before the volunteer would leave. So it is not just that one receives a plane ticket and then takes the plane to Malawi or some other country. So we have a lot of kind of materials that we give them. We have briefings. When you arrive in the country as a volunteer, it is our team in country. In each of these countries, we have a team that works for farmer to farmer. They are there to first introduce you to the host, to get you settled. We have lots and lots of procedures for security. So, for example, all the hotels where the volunteers stay, our security, CNFA security director and staff have checked them. And so we know that those places are safe. We have a lot of other procedures in terms of volunteer safety. And the team in the countries, the volunteer has the phone numbers to call them if there are any issues. Our team also both checks with the host and checks with the volunteers just to make sure everything is going well. So it isn't really at all like going to the trip on your own. There's much more support, and we have all these procedures to try to make sure that everything will really go well. And one thing I did not mention maybe about enough was the fact that we will focus, of course, very much on economic growth and food security. But part of the program really is also about people-to-people diplomacy. So by working together with, in this case, agro processors in Africa, it also advances people-to-people diplomacy. It helps people to understand each other better and understand each other's cultures better. So that is really an important part, and we are really trying to make sure that that part also happens, and the volunteers who go to Africa, that they really have a good experience with it, and that they come back really as satisfied as both having had a chance to make a real contribution in terms of processing, but then also make a real contribution in terms of teaching about their own cultures, but also learning. Did that answer your question?
That was good. It just skipped a second. Excellent. So thank you, Marjatta. Excellent presentation. We do have some questions, so keep sharp for the panel discussion at the end. There's some good questions to come. Now let's switch over to our next presenter. So we'll do the switch. Amy? Great. Great last presentation by the folks at CNFA. So now we're going to switch to another presentation I'm very excited about by John Kashinyaki, who's the Deputy Chief of Party for the Kenya Investment Mechanism. John's going to talk about their experience catalyzing investment for enterprises in Kenya. John's background is he's the Deputy Chief for the Kenyan Investment Mechanism that's been implemented by the Palladium Group. John has over 20 years of experience in private sector development with a key focus in market research, business planning for projects and enterprises in East Africa. So John, we're really excited to hear your thoughts. And so I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Peter. I hope I can be heard. And it's really good to join this distinguished panel, to be part of the group sharing experiences in our work on the continent and specifically in Kenya. And as Peter mentioned, I'll be sharing the experience of Kenya Investment Mechanism, which is a 2-year-old program now, established and funded by USAID and being implemented by the Palladium Group. And really our focus, I think we've heard some interesting experiences that cut across the challenges that processors face and working directly with companies. Ours will be focusing very specifically on a mechanism that is geared and targeted towards helping increase access to finance for companies and basically transforming the market system in the country to make it more self-reliant in the long term and sustainable so that companies can raise capital in a more efficient and effective market space. So my presentation basically quickly give you an overview of the program, how it's structured so that you understand the mechanism itself, the thinking behind it, what we've achieved so far, talk a little bit about COVID and some of the responses to COVID that we had, and a couple of examples then of some transactions that have closed and emerging lessons. So as mentioned, Kenya Investment Mechanism, it's a 5-year activity to end in 2023. So we've been operating now for 2 years. There's special consideration given to investments that empower women, employ youth, and support smallholder agriculture. We have a number of partners. Initial funding came from the Women's Global Development Program, Prosper. The objectives of the program are to mobilize $400 million in finance and investment to specific sectors, and I'll talk more about those sectors, to structure 15 strategic partnerships that will unlock capital at scale, to ensure that at least 1,600 transactions are funded, supported by business advisors and or dispersed by financial institutions, to support improved policy, at least 25, enabling environment, finance, and investment policies for key sectors, clean energy, livestock, dairy, and horticulture. And we also manage the Development Credit Authority, which some of you may be aware is a US government scheme that really helps to provide guarantees through financial institutions to unlock capital for specific sectors. So we're working with several financial institutions that have DCA agreements. The approach, basically, we look at both the supply and the demand side, and we have a structured incentive scheme, which I'll talk about on both the supply and demand side, which is targeted at leveraging financing and creating a more sustainable market system that can mobilize capital for the private sector to long term. So on the demand side, we work with business advisory service providers, and we have subcontracts with them. In our first, basically 2 years, we had 20 companies that were engaged. We have now brought on board an additional 20, so we have a total of 40 companies. Some have dropped off, but we have basically 35 companies that we're working with under subcontract. And these companies are paid success fees for transactions that they're able to take to market and actually get financed. And they're basically paid a percentage of the size of loan or financing that they're able to mobilize. It's mandatory that clients also sign up to pay a certain portion of the fee. The incentive really is not the full amount that the company would need to cover its costs. It's really a sweetener, and it's really targeted at pushing some of these advisory firms that previously were not working in these sectors to look at deals in these sectors and allow them maybe to offset some of the costs of the initial work that was required to understand these sectors. Over time, the aim is to reduce these success fees so that a market fully pays for services that are provided by the business advisors. Just in the picture, one of the companies that has received support is a fish farm in Lake Victoria, which is aiming to be one of the largest fish farms in Africa. Currently is one of the largest on the continent. On the supply side, we work with, again, we have agreements with banks, non-bank financial institutions, microfinance institutions, and some impact investors to, again, incentivize them to look at deals in our target sectors. And they get paid, again, a percentage of the transaction ranging between 1% and 3%. And the aim is to slowly, gradually reduce the incentive over time as the financial institutions begin to increase their lending and get to understand these sectors more. They will be able to continue to do it on their own. So basically, the overall approach is we have transaction advisors on the demand side. We do provide capacity building support to them as well. We do training and other kinds of support to help them to move into these markets, hands-on technical assistance. Then we also have the financial institutions on the other side. We provide performance incentives, and also working with our DCA, we provide support and risk mitigating tools that would help structure some of these deals. We also provide capacity building and training to financial institutions, helping them design products, train their staff to understand new value chains, understand the opportunities in these value chains and how to structure deals. And really the whole aim is to push both from the demand and the supply side, players in the market to look for opportunities and structure opportunities in sectors that have previously not had significant amounts of capital. Just by way of example, in Kenya, for example, if you look at bank lending to the agriculture sector, less than 5% of the total lending goes to the agriculture sector. And we know that agriculture sector accounts for at least 30% of GDP. So the idea is to push financial institutions to move into these sectors, help them to understand the risk and increase capital mobilization to players in these sectors. So looking at the key sectors of the 400 million, we have a target of about 17 million for horticulture, within dairy about 90 million, livestock 50 million, and other sectors. Some of these other sectors include Prosper Africa, which is sector agnostic. It's really companies that have some element of a US nexus, either through trade or actual shareholding. Energy and infrastructure, health, water and sanitation, as well as education, workforce development, trade, and environmental tourism. These are new sectors that have come in in year 2 that we're moving to get financing mobilized in the next two to 3 years. What has been our experience so far? If you look first quarter, nothing mobilized. By quarter 3, we had about 6 million in 2019. And we've had a very strong experience quarter 4 and throughout 2020. And we've been able to mobilize as of, the figure there is July 30th, but as of September 30th, about 121 million US dollars, both from the business advisory service providers and the financial institutions. Roughly about $70 million has been mobilized by advisors, 47 million by financial institutions, and then direct KIM facilitation, about $5 million US. Our target to women and youth, specific amounts, 20 million for women and 3.4 million to youth. This is data we're looking at closely. We're always trying to see how we can do better, and we're really looking at how we can improve on the youth element. Some of it is the challenges. Youth-owned businesses are very early stage, and we're trying to see how best we can scale up financing to youth. But when we look at employment across both women and youth, the companies that we're supporting, significant employment. I don't have the data with me, but there is significant employment across women and youth. We're also seeing that, interestingly, many of the companies, because we're focused a lot in our first 2 years on companies in agribusiness, many of the companies have backward linkages to smallholder farmers. And when we look at the companies that we have in our pipeline, over 5 million smallholder farmers are connected to these companies, 121 companies that we're working with. And when we look at our pipeline, we've been able to generate a pipeline in two years of about 700 million US dollars. And out of that, 625 million are actually under engagement by one of our advisory companies, and they're being helped to raise capital. So we're quite encouraged by these results, and particularly the ability to work with multiple partners and really move and incentivize the market to mobilize capital at scale. In relation to this presentation, processes account for 30% of our total pipeline, and in terms of actual capital mobilized, it's roughly about the same, 30% of capital mobilized. What has also been interesting for us during this very difficult 2020 is how, because of the pipeline that had been developed, in spite of COVID, we've been able to see companies raise money. But that said, there were a lot of challenges faced by many of the companies in our pipeline, and I think that was alluded to in the earlier presentation. Supply chains were disrupted, companies lost significant income streams, banks and other investors slowed down on providing any finance, very risk averse. So we needed to really look at how we could support our partners to continue to be active, to continue to engage with the companies they were working with. Many of them buckled down, didn't look for new clients, just really focused on the companies that they had and really looked to see how they could support them, introduce them to COVID relief funds. We, as KIM, also developed strategic partnerships with 2 COVID relief funds that came into the market and introduced them to our advisors. The support that was being provided, many of our advisors had to reorient their support and focus a lot on just helping companies to raise a bridge finance that they needed just to survive in this difficult period. For example, we actually the fish farm that we mentioned, a fast-growing company, but during this period faced a lot of challenges, working capital challenges, and we really buckled down to help them just get the money they needed to support working capital, and they were able to raise $1 million. As the period has evolved, we continue to work with the company, and just a couple of weeks ago, they were able to now raise growth capital of about $3 million, which is really going to help the business. And they're seeing significant growth, interestingly, because of the disruptions in the supply chain. Kenya is a net importer of fish from China, and this company produces locally and actually has seen their demand grow by up to 40%. So they're seeing significant demand for their product. So the capital has come in at just the right time to really help them meet the needs of the market. We also looked at the incentive payments we were giving. Some of our advisory firms were having a lot of working capital challenges in this period. So we increased the incentive during this COVID period from 1% to 2%. Also to the banks, the commercial banks, we increased the incentive period. We noticed that the domestic banking system really dried up in terms of lending. Our lending by financial institutions went down by 40%. So we increased the incentive to encourage them to continue to look at lending opportunities in this difficult time. And then our advisors also work closely with the companies to remodel their financial projections, do additional market analysis that really helped companies to be able to present their case to investors and provide comfort to investors. As had been mentioned earlier, in Kenya, as we've had an easing of restrictions, the economy has started to pick up again, not to the level that, of course, pre-COVID, but we're beginning to see companies now establish some level of stability, and investors are now coming in. And I think that also helped us to have the impact that we had in terms of helping companies raise money during this period. Just some quick examples of companies. We have a company there that's in the nut trade, fair trade nuts. We have another company, Sunculture, that's in irrigation and technology for smallholders. They were able to raise 8.5 million in equity investment. Again, these are investors that are looking long-term. Victory Farms, $1 million in bridge finance. Synergy, a waste organic fertilizer and waste company, had significant challenges early on, but have been able to raise $2.6 million to help in their growth. Komaza is an agro forestry company, was able to raise a significant amount of capital, $27 million. That's really unique, but they have a long-term vision, and investors really bought into their vision for the long term. Another macadamia nuts exporting company, exporting to the US and other parts of the world, was able to raise $1 million debt and still continue looking for equity. A dairy, a modern processor, able to raise $2 million. And then we have an agricultural supply chain platform that provides last mile distribution services as well as business intelligence across the supply chain, and able to raise $3 million in working capital. And a textile manufacturing company that exports to the US was actually able to retool their business during COVID to manufacture PPE equipment. And one of our advisory firms helped them raise domestic capital, about $700,000, which really helped them to support the manufacture of PPE equipment. That was really helpful under COVID. One of the examples, this is a dairy that we supported. They collect, just to show the impact of some of these companies that they have in the market. This company collects raw milk from 10,000 farmers. It serves over 30,000 liters, and they really focus on the poorer segment to informal settlements, and they use an innovative dispensers. They don't use the expensive packaging. Individuals can buy their milk through retail outlets. in the informal settlements. This new investment that they recently got will help them to source from additional 30,000 farmers. And their plan is to increase their payments from 1 to 2, which will really help with farmers' cash flow. And some of the work provided by the advisors was the investment memorandum and teaser, doing market analysis, updating the market analysis to give comfort to investors. Interestingly, this company has been growing even under COVID, so that helped provide confidence to investors. And also to retool some of the financial modeling and forecasting to help investors understand the business model going forward. So some of the lessons that we're learning after the first 2 years is that there is a role, helping companies actually structure transactions on the demand side. There is a role, and the market needs good structuring advisors that can help provide the right information, the right linkages to financial institutions and investors that can do analysis that is critical. For example, Komaza, a critical element of the analysis was a very complicated valuation of the forestry business projected going forward the next 30 years. And our advisors really helped to structure and do that valuation that gave confidence to investors. So there is some appreciation of this value in the market, and companies seeing the value and willing to pay increasingly. Of course, it's still early stages, but there is definitely appreciation we're seeing for the support. The deal closure rate is about 15% of our pipeline value. We've noticed that it takes some time, significant amount of time. In some cases, it's much faster. In other cases, it takes time. And that's something that we're looking at to see if there's any way we can facilitate faster deal closure. But we recognize that, if only 15% of the companies in our pipeline are getting finance, there's still a huge need. And companies, there's a lot of issues related to investment readiness, a lot of issues related to, I'll talk about it further down, having products that financial institutions that fit the needs of growing companies, that fit the needs of companies with less collateral, that fit the needs of companies in risk sectors. So there's still a lot of work to be done, both on the supply and demand side, to facilitate more increase to capital in this market. And COVID, of course, had a big impact. But even with COVID, what we learned is that it's still possible if companies have the right structure and plans for them to raise money. So that's the end of my presentation. Just on a light note, the president visited one of our stands at last year's AmCham Summit and was looking at some of the companies that we've been working with. So I'll end my presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, great, John. Great job, John. Wonderful presentation of the activities in Kenya through the investment mechanism project. We have a number of questions. The way we're gonna run is got a question or two right now. Then we'll switch over to our panel discussion, and Amy will help everyone get mics on, cameras on, and so forth. And then we have a series of questions for our panel discussion. So John, just to finish off this segment, I wondered if you talk about the private sector, because you're obviously filling a huge need for the food processing. Think of food processing in ag space. How does the private sector look at that space, and what is the failure that makes Kim necessary?
Yeah, so I think the food processing is quite a diverse business. In Kenya, we have the feed, we have poultry business, we have dairy, we have ag, fruit processors. So it's quite diverse. There's growing consumer demand, and there's a huge need for produce coming into the market. There's also a growing export market. So it's definitely a growth industry. What we find is companies are coming in now, what we'd call early and mid-stage companies, entrepreneurs coming in with the idea, but they need really the capital to help them to do the right investments in the processing equipment, as well as to structure their businesses in the right way. And because of the demand, they're growing quite fast. They need capital, but the understanding of these sectors by financial institutions isn't keeping up to pace with the needs of some of the companies. So there's a need for, and also there's a need for support to help present the opportunity in the right way to investors and financiers, to help them understand. And that's really the gap that Kim is coming in, is really to create a stronger market for, on the one hand, advisors and companies that are able to help the new companies coming into the market to structure and raise money. On the other side, also helping financial institutions and investors to better design products that will finance some of these emerging companies coming in the food industry. Yeah. I hope that helps to answer your question.
Yeah, there are a number of other questions, John, so be on your toes as we get to the panel session. But let's stop here and convene the panel, and then we have a whole series of questions that came in through the chat that we'll roll through and get a nice discussion going. So I'll turn it back over to you, Amy. Welcome back, everyone. Change of plans. We were able to, thanks to hard work by Kingsley and Amy, to bring in Kingsley Masamba and his presentation about some work done in Malawi. So let me just give a very brief introduction, certainly not all his due, but just for time. Kingsley's going to be talking about challenges affecting agro-processors in developing countries, a case study of Malawi. And Kingsley is an associate professor at LUANAR, the Lilongwe University of Ag and Natural Resources. So Kingsley, I'm going to turn.
Can reduce that loss and increase incomes to the subsistence farmers, but also to the country as a whole in terms of the national economy. Next, please. Yeah, so this agro-processing that we are talking about, which more specific to Malawi, you can talk with at different levels. Agro-processing at household level, where the emphasis is to process for a household consumption. But it can also be at a level of probably cooperative or an association where a group of people get together, financed by different organizations, but also at a large scale in terms of big players in the food industry. So that just demonstrates the agro-processing that we talk about, so that you may appreciate that the challenges that we'll be talking about shortly cut across all these levels. Next, please. Yeah, so in this one, we wanted to share with you the methodology that we have used to identify these challenges. As I pointed out on the very onset, that these challenges are not as a result of looking for information in literature, but our experiences. So like over the years, our institution, LUANAR, and other partners, stakeholders, we have been engaging in agro-processing at different levels, the level that I have talked about, at household level, at cooperative level, association level, but also at other bigger industries. Next, please. Yeah, so for the services that we have offered in these interactions, it has been on trainings on various aspects of food processing, for example, food product development, quality assurance, monitoring and auditing, including consultation so that we know their problems before we do the training, but also on issues about certification. We are not a certifying agency, but we train them based on the requirements that are needed by the Malawi Bureau of Standards, which is like the certification body. So we provide training. We also guide most of these agro-processors so that they know. But also we do food analysis so that they have the nutritional information for labeling purposes. And during our interaction with these, we have reached more than 40 agro-processors, many small scale, and probably maybe 10 to 20 companies, which we can classify under Malawi standards, maybe like large scale. Next, please. Yeah, so this is just a pictorial presentation of the services that I have talked about. We have conducted trainings, like for example, in the areas where these people are processing, like the picture that you see. The other one, we do consultation to find out their problem so that you can plan training according to their needs. And that is just a pictorial presentation of so many of the trainings that we have conducted, but also some of the meetings, the consultation meetings that we have conducted with the agro-processors at the different level that I have talked about. Next, please. Okay, so these are, I would call them some selected projects engagements. For example, the first one, back in 2007, we had a surveillance of some selected small-scale processing projects in central and southern region of Malawi. We did this with collaboration with our colleagues from Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology in Kenya, because by that time there was a program by government, the One Village, One Product program, which originated from Japan. So we wanted to have an understanding of the problems that these small-scale processors do face. And then we have been involved with the One Village, One Product from 2009 to 2016, providing them the services that I have talked about. I would like also to mention here that after this project was phased, all the agro-processors, which are many cooperatives, were absorbed by the Ministry of Trade and Industry. Now they are separate ministries, and we are still continuing with the same services that we have been doing before: product development, monitoring, certification issues, looking at their products, analyzing the nutrient content so that they can be helped in nutritional labeling of their products. We had also a project back in 2010, which was better training for safer food in Africa, which was meant that agro-processors that deals with the EU understand the food safety requirements. So it was a project which involved students as interns attached to 9 food companies. We were doing auditing. We had checklists on things to look for. Just examples, but suffice to say that we have done a lot of engagements with different stakeholders maybe on a very short term, maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks. But these are some of the major ones that we have engaged in. Next, please. Okay, so the impacts, what has been the impacts of our engagements with these agro-processors? What we have observed over the years is there has been a better understanding on all issues related to good manufacturing practices, good hygienic practices, and to some, maybe on a HACCP. I'm saying to some because I know that most of the small-scale processors, it's very difficult for them to implement the HACCP because they are still struggling with the GMP and GHP issues. We have also seen improved hygienic practices among these processors. We have seen like better understanding of the food standards because most of them, when we started with, they were not aware that each specific food product has got its own standard, and therefore, through our engagements with them, they have a better understanding of the food standards, and therefore the certification process has a little bit been easier. There has also been some improvement and on knowledge and skills on different areas in food processing, because we are aware that, you know, for them to change, they have to be impacted with these skills and knowledge. Next, please. Okay, so these are like improved product quality. I think if you go in some of the shops, there are other products which have been certified through our engagements. Let me also mention that it's not only us. I mean, there are other agro-processors that have interacted with also other players, but we think that we have contributed to the improved product quality. But also there have been some certification of these agro-processors because they know the processes that are involved in the certification process as required by our regulating authority, food regulating authority, which is the Malawi Bureau of Standards. Next, please. Okay, so these are the challenges now. I was giving you the background of what we have been doing, but I think the whole idea was to present on the challenges, because we know that if you know the challenges, it will be easy for you at least to look at the solutions. So what we have observed through our interaction is the non-compliances with respect to GMP and GHP, especially for small-scale processors. Let me also mention, as I pointed out earlier, that yes, there were so many non-compliances, but I think for most of the agro-processors that we have reached there has been some improvements. There have also been some limited and lack of trained personnel in the areas of food processing. This is an area that requires some expertise. There are others who just start without any prior knowledge, and therefore this is also a very big example, a very big problem, a challenge. There have also been some lack of working control systems. If you are in food processing, there are certain things that you need to have. For example, the thermometers, the moisture meters, all these things, we have observed that most of the, especially the small scale processor, they don't. You want to measure the acidity, it's not there. There have also been some limited knowledge of specific food standards, which is very common among most of the agro-processors, especially the small scale. We have also seen that there is absence of traceability systems, that people cannot even trace the raw materials, like the whole food value chain, so that they can see maybe the problems that arise, for example, in the products, the raw materials that they work with. So absence of traceability systems, very common in most of the agro-processors. Next, please. Okay, so there has also been limited access due to absence of certification, because the requirement is for you to have your products on the retail markets, you need to have a product which is certified. So the biggest challenge has been on the certification, especially on the processing premises, because certification is at two levels: certification of the product, but also at the processing premises. There has been some limited financial resources to implement the appropriate changes. There are other agro-processors who knows what they are supposed to be doing, but probably the challenge has been on the financial resources. Let me also connect with the financial resources with the issue of certification, because when they are under certification, for example, scheme under the Malawi Bureau of Standards, they need to pay a fee for like every visit. And this is a very big problem, especially for the small-scale processors. You have also poor utility infrastructure and scarce water supply. This is a requirement, and because some of these processors are in rural, remote areas, the water is a problem. You don't have piped water probably in their facility, but also the facilities are not in good conditions. Next, please. Okay, so another challenge is also the lack of refrigeration and high cost of electricity. And this is a very big problem for perishable products. For example, the soya milk, during our engagements with other agro-processors who are involved probably in soya milk production, that has been a big, big problem. Sometimes you have electricity, but because of blackouts, you have also problems. And there's also limited electricity connectivity, especially in rural areas. I'm sure this is common in most of the developing countries. And then you have also low production from small-scale farmers with limited inputs. Here, maybe we can give an example of the soya beans. Sometimes there is a mismatch. You hear the farmers complaining they don't have a market, and yet the people who want to buy, they will tell you that the quantities are not enough. But many, because most of the production is from small holder farmers. Next, please. So having talked about these challenges, these are the recommendations that we think that if they can be implemented, there might be some positive changes to address the challenges. So the first one is that the stakeholders with expertise in agro-processing, for example, institutions of higher learning like us, it's not only us, we have also other institutions who have got programs in areas of food science, agro-processing. They should work closely with these agro-processors in various areas of agro-processing, such as quality assurance and certification of issues, certification. But also the processors should also be able to be assisted in market access for their products, because I think for them, they also lack market skills, business skills, and therefore there is need for deliberate effort to help them access the markets. Again, connected this with certification, that first the products have to be certified. Next, please. And again, this is something that I think we have observed, that these processors, they need to have the necessary prerequisites before engaging in agro-processing. I think our view is not everyone is supposed to be involved in agro-processing or value addition. You need some prerequisites. Maybe they can be suppliers of the raw materials, but I think when coming up with initiatives, especially government-initiated initiatives, it's like people are encouraged to go in value addition agro-processing. And we think that you need at least to self-evaluate yourself whether you have the necessary prerequisites. There's also need for appropriate and adequate training in various aspects in food processing. It should be provided for people to start agro-processing. There is need some basic training. It's not only the passion, but you need to have the training. But also what we have observed, although our focus was only on the technical side, on areas of agro-processing, there's need for training on governance, because we have seen like the agro-processor that we have engaged, a lot of issues to do with governance. You find that the groups are breaking, especially maybe when they have made profits, and they also need to be well equipped with business skills by various stakeholders. Next, please. Okay, and again, agro-processors, especially the small-scale ones, should be financially assisted to implement the necessary challenges. Yes, we can provide them with all the training that they need, but there are certain things that they need which will require some financial injection, and therefore it's important that they have to be assisted. On how, I think that can be a big debate, so that we want them also to be self-sustainable in their businesses. And lastly, we need also constant monitoring of the agro-processors, again, with respect to requirements for quality assurance. Because what we have seen with the most of the agro-processors is the moment that maybe you spend a lot of time without checking on them, when you go there, you find out that they have started doing the same thing that you have maybe been training them on to improve. Okay, next, which is the last one. Okay, thank you for your attention. I hope I have been brief enough for my presentation. I thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Great job, everyone. So glad we could get Kingsley on and the folks from Malawi. That was great effort on the part of both Kingsley and Amy. Thanks so much for doing that. So now we've got a panel together. We've got a number of questions that come in on the chat, and we'll go try to run through them. So try to be as brief as you can in your responses, but this is great stuff. So Kingsley, let me ask you a question about, you talked a lot about the need for training and certificates. Don't be shy. I'd like to know, I think people would like to know what sorts of, if I'm a food processor in Malawi, what sorts of certificates and training programs are available for food processors. I see you're muted right now.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Peter, for that very important question. As I indicated, like in Malawi, we have the Malawi Bureau of Standards, which is responsible for certification of the agro-processor. So the certification is on 2 stages. A certification of your product against a food standard, but also certification of your processing facilities. So there is a standard, I think it's a code of hygienic practices for food processing. So it has a lot of things that, for example, if you are in processing, you need to follow. For example, the buildings, the facilities which are there, some requirements including the personnel that are supposed to be in the food processing. They have to be medically examined every 6 months. It's a whole 17-page document explaining everything. So like when you want to get like certified, that is what is used as a checklist. So it's not like a one-time event. They monitor them, and if they comply, they are given what is called pre-certification, like a temporary certificate. And the product that they are making is also tested against the standard. So once you comply all these things, then that's when you get the certification now that you are certified for your products to be sold on the market. So that's what it means, like in summary. But the Malawi Bureau of Standards they have got guidelines on the steps that they follow for a company, for a food processor to be certified. I don't know whether, Peter, I have answered your question.
No, that's, oh, sorry, Susan, did you want to add something there to Kingsley's thoughts? Okay. So we'll move to the next question because we want to get the questions in and time is short. Another question came in for Marjatta. The question was about young people who may not have the industry experience necessary to serve as a volunteer for a agro processor, food processor. Are there opportunities for university trained engineers and technical experts that don't have the actual experience?
Yes. Okay. Peter, is this for me or?
No, this is for Marjatta. So you'll need to mute right now and we'll go to another panelist. Good.
Yes, thank you very much for that question. And yes, we do have, most of our volunteers have decades of experience in their fields, but we do have sometimes volunteers who are, for example, might be graduate students or who have relatively recently, for example, finished their master's degree or, and haven't been more than a few years in employment. So from the kind of typically we would, want to make sure that the person, does really have the skills that are needed for that host organization to be able to complete that assignment. Currently, because of COVID, as I mentioned, we have these paired assignments where a US volunteer works virtually together with the local volunteer. And, typically in those cases, our US volunteers, in some cases, they are linking with local volunteers who, might have just had a few years of work experience, because you do have that linkage then with somebody who has that longer experience, and therefore together they can support that host organization. So that's for us is the important thing. What is the focus of that scope of work? What are the needs in that organization? And then pairing up that organization with the right volunteer.
Peter, if I may add to that, just for the person asking that question, the program that Jonathan runs, for example, does have an internship program across the 5 countries that it is in, and that includes Malawi and Zambia and Kenya. So that does allow for local graduates from food tech industry and universities to come in, and then they work with us through our sort of client database, and we help place them within companies to get the more practical experience and to sort of seed them that way, right? So it's slightly different to the volunteer model, but it is something of interest for this, maybe for that person asking the question.
Just to add, I think that is particularly helpful for some of the smaller clients that Kingsley was talking about, where maybe they're struggling to implement good manufacturing practices. The graduate, even though they may not have much work experience, has the technical know-how, and they can help those smaller clients with those basic implementation challenges.
Yeah, and Marjatta, you were going to add something?
Yes, yeah, and for youth in the countries where we work, we are also always looking for people to work with our volunteers. So they basically, our volunteers typically don't have the language skills, for example, to be working with all of the hosts. And so for some of these kind of youth coming from these countries, that might be a really nice opportunity also to be working with somebody who has a long experience support the assignment and be able to also then contribute technically when possible.
Yeah, nice. Next question came in for John, and I guess you could expect it, John. They said, how does a processor access Kim? So how does that work? Oh, we can't hear you. You're muted.
That's a great question. I'm not sure if we're on. I'll definitely provide my email contacts, but we're on social media. We're on LinkedIn. We just got a website, and we're quite active. Definitely through social media and trying to publicize what we do. We recently had a learning event where we had over 200 participants. But I think, yeah, Kim also through our communications, and I'll be able to share our communications portal so that people can access, and then we can then from there refer them to potential support.
Excellent, thank you. Next question came in somewhat technical from the survey, Brent, about, as you pointed out, and the slide clearly showed the disproportionate effect of COVID on women enterprises. The questioner is asking what size of the companies were surveyed, or what was the range, and so forth, and how were the women enterprises? How did they compare to, say, the average or the mode, or?
Yeah. No, thanks, Pete. So that is a good question, and it's the first thing we did look at when we dug deeper. I just didn't have the space today to go into the details. But we categorized the companies into 3 sizes. So those below $500,000 annual revenue, those between 500 and 2 million, and those greater than 2 million. And so we were thinking, oh, this is going to fall into one of those boxes. But it was, again, surprisingly equally distributed across the size of businesses, the impact on the gender impact. So, a large woman-owned business was also experiencing same challenges as a small woman-owned businesses. And there might have been slightly differences in where those challenges were exactly. So we did look at that, and again we came up stumped, like we couldn't find an obvious answer in the limited sort of data we had on hand, based on sort of cross-examining that. We also looked at it across value chain. So was it specific to a value chain? There was no variable against the other trend. So it was really just, it's something else. And that's why I say it really points to the need for deeper research in this, and a little bit more investigation, more specific questioning. On our side, programmatically, we kind of responded to that, knowing that we need to put more focus on woman-owned businesses, and maybe ask more questions around this, and sort of tailor our responses. That's as far as we've sort of got in responding to that right now, short of resources for a deeper study.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, glad for that question. We have time for one more question, and I'll throw it to Kingsley and Susan. The questioner is asking about remote training, education, certification in Malawi. What's the status in terms of accessing courses, certification, so forth, virtually? Wait,
yeah, thank you so much. I will attempt to answer this one. I think this is something which has come because of the pandemic. And I think the biggest challenge to access these services virtually, I think, is probably the poor internet connectivity, especially for these are agro-processors, especially those that are very small. They may not access probably the internet connectivity, but this is something I think that can be tried. But I think I see that it might be very difficult, especially in developing countries. Probably, Susan, you want to say something?
Yeah, thank you, Kingsley. I think you have ably explained almost everything, but maybe what I can add is at community level, sometimes it's affected by maybe the topography, hard to reach areas where you identify agro-processors to teach them, then you teach them. It becomes a challenge to monitor because of the access to maybe roads and other infrastructures. I've been engaged in a lot of processing at a household level, at community level, just for consumption. Maybe the challenges are almost the same, because when people process, like say, a soy milk, they don't have preservation methods, because refrigeration is an issue. There is no electricity and they cannot keep that milk for a long time. Even if they process just to sell within their communities, one as an income generating activity for the mother groups, and in Malawi now we use care groups. So they are willing to process because we have trained them through care groups on how to process soya using different using different methods to produce different products. But the issue is maybe even for them to sell, it becomes a problem because of the nature of the products. Like soy milk, they cannot sell it within their community for maybe the next 2 days, then the milk would have gone bad. But what we emphasize most is the corn soya blend, especially for complementary feeding. So that one, at least it works. But I think the issue that Kingsley said, soy processing, it demands a lot of work, for them to maybe to roast or maybe to boil, then dehull, whatever. So when you are not there, people tend to stop it because of the process. It's not a simple process. So as Kingsley said, maybe simple equipment that can aid their processing to be faster and maybe easier than manually processing soya at community level. That one affects people to continue processing soya. So as a result, they stop. They will go there. If you go there, they will do it because you are there. You are with them. But after that, they say it's a lot of work. I have a lot of things to do. Women, they are busy in the communities with maybe their household chores and the like. So they don't want to take maybe the whole day just processing soya. Then they make the products. Then maybe the market is not whatever. And packaging is also an issue. I don't know how the project can help. Maybe simple packaging. I saw it in Japan when they were when I went to Japan, how they trained women. Just simple packaging, very attractive, so that maybe it can be sent to other, maybe in towns or maybe in trading centers and sell them. Because if it's not packaged, usually it's not attracted to customers. So when you want them to do business and make maybe some income, they become frustrated. Because if it's not packaged, maybe it doesn't attract a lot of customers. So those are the issues that maybe we need to look into. But otherwise, everything is doable. I think nutrition education, we have done a lot of nutrition education about the corn soya blends, the milk and other products from soybean. People know how to prepare, people know how to process. But the issue is maybe time, markets, and also packaging to make them more attractive, and also monitoring, as Kingsley has said. So like the care group model, we select a volunteer for each care group to monitor its group. So if we train them, then it becomes easier. They monitor and they report. They monitor and they report, then the frontline workers are part of it. So it's very, I heard, is it the one who was presenting on Malawi again? the name, I don't want to mispronounce it. But also, the organizations, maybe the NGOs and all other players that are working on soybean processing, I think we need to talk to each other.
Yeah, Susan, these are great suggestions
Yes.
and guidance, because I think there's been, I think this is a panel that's very familiar and recognizes and would agree 100% about the challenges for small enterprises engaging all aspects of food processing, or even more specifically, soy dairy processing, which is a complex process. Everyone, we've run to the end of our time. We've had a great panel. I want to thank everyone for preparing so well, presenting so well, and then those who asked questions there on the chat. Great questions and just a very rich session. I learned a lot, and I think the audience has a good set of contacts. So I'll turn it back over to you, Amy, and I want to thank the presenters. Thank you.